Returning to our coverage now of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, Steven Hamilton is the Chief Economist at Blueprint Institute and Assistant Professor of Economics at George Washington University. He's written in today's Sydney Morning Herald that our rollout is a disaster and has offered some advice on how to fix it. He joins me now. Steven Hamilton, thanks so much for your time. First and foremost, you say the states should be given full autonomy over how their rollout proceeds. Explain your thinking on that.
Yeah, so over the last week, we've seen, a sort of blame game erupt between the feds and states over who's to blame for this sort of disastrous rollout. I should note that, we started the rollout 2 or 3 months later than other countries, and we're running at about half the pace that they were 6 weeks into their rollout, right? So we are started late and we're running slow. So, this notion that we'll get done by the end of the year, I think, is looking increasingly unlikely. Now, instead of a blame game between the states and the feds, I think what we need to clearly define who's responsible for what so that that party can be accountable for delivery, right? So what we would like to see, more autonomy, more control over exactly how the rollout proceeds in terms of who'll provide the vaccines, distribution through mass vaccination centres. We'd like more of that responsibility to pass to the states. The feds should get as many vaccines as they can and pump them into the states. And then if the states can't deliver them, it's their fault, right? So the blame game happens because we don't know who is responsible for which part of the vaccine rollout.
There's my colleague Andrew Clennell reports today that the Prime Minister will seek to get state agreement to some greater transparency around the vaccine numbers. That too is something you're calling for. You think that transparency is crucial in all of this?
That's right. So once the feds have given the states more autonomy, given them control over how their rollout proceeds, what's needed from the feds is then, one, obviously to get more vaccines as quickly as possible, but also to make it crystal clear to the Australian public exactly how many vaccines we've received, exactly how many vaccines they're provided to the states and where, so that the accountability is clear. And the other thing I would say is the rollout to date has just been clouded by kind of obfuscation, right? There's been too many instances where policymakers, including chief medical officers and others, haven't been clear with the Australian people about, what the situation with the vaccines is, rather than, unrealistic targets and excuses. What we want to see is real, hard, objective facts provided to the Australian people on a daily basis so that we all have a sense of what's happening with the rollout. So more transparency about, how many doses are coming, how many doses we've ordered, what we've tried to do to get more, would I think help with this really crumbling public confidence in the rollout.
And you also want to see, I guess, not just in terms of rebooting confidence, but stepping up the numbers to try and get to those scales that you referred to overseas. You want a total rethink and expansion when it comes to the distribution channels here.
That's right. I mean, for some unknown reason, frankly, the government decided to go with a GP-led vaccine rollout. The GPs can play a role, and it's important that they do. But one of the reasons why places like the US have been able to roll out so quickly is because they've relied significantly on two things. One, mass vaccination centers. So they have, entire football stadiums, right, where they are vaccinating thousands and thousands of people en masse, and we aren't doing that. And the other thing is they're rolling the vaccine out via pharmacies. So there's a pharmacy on just about every corner in most major American cities, and you just go down to your local CVS and you can get vaccinated there. So I would like to see, if the government gives more responsibility to the states, I would like to see the states radically expand the distribution channels. Every vaccine that comes into the country or that comes off the production line gets pumped into the distribution channels and pushed out as quickly as possible so that we can, we need a huge step change in the rate of vaccinations to something like 200,000 a day in order to hit our target of completion by the end of the year. And at this pace, we'll be well into mid to late 2022 if we don't step things up.
The other issue, I guess it's relevant to a few of the things we're talking about, but certainly when it comes to the acquisition of vaccine types, you believe, and you've said this for many months now, that the government's approach is underdone, that essentially they've been guilty of penny pinching when it comes to the vaccine opportunities that we're afforded. What can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so we wrote a piece back on February 1 and have been very loud for the last 2 months on this point. Now, the trouble with vaccines is you have to think about, we're not used to contemplating the enormous economic costs of not having a vaccine. So the fact that we've devised these vaccines, they're a kind of miracle, right? So a Pfizer vaccine is 95% effective, which means in 95% of people, they have full protection from the virus. Now, what that allows us to do, if we get that vaccine out into the population really quickly, is it allows us to open up much quicker than maybe we had expected, right? We can open our international borders. That means we can get tens of thousands of students in, which is one of our largest export markets, thousands of foreign workers in, which our industries desperately need, foreign tourism up again. The quicker we get vaccinated, the quicker we can open up. And the trouble is, the AstraZeneca vaccine costs about $2 to $3 per dose. And we've estimated the economic benefits of those doses to be in the thousands of dollars. Right? So when you have a cost-benefit ratio that's 1,000 times, right, the benefits to the costs, that justifies really a radical vaccine ordering process. And unfortunately, that's not what we've seen. So, we haven't ordered sufficient numbers of the vaccines that are available. We haven't made an agreement with vaccine maker Moderna, which has one of the leading vaccines. We don't have an agreement with Johnson & Johnson. It's not clear whether we've said to Pfizer, right, the leading vaccine maker, what will you accept to give us more vaccines at any cost? The US, right, we've had all these problems with EU supply. Well, the US is getting to a state very quickly that their numbers of vaccinations are going to start falling and their supply is going to continue to rise. So the US is going to start having excess supply of vaccines. I'd like to know, has the government talked to the US, who we have a very special relationship with, to get access to their excess supply to support our vaccine rollout? We have no transparency as to what the government is doing to ramp this vaccine rollout up. All we've got to date is statements like, we're not in a race, we're not in a hurry. And when we have billions of dollars of economic activity on the line, I just want to see more urgency.
What do you say to the argument, though, that, and this is an argument that's been put by senior members of the government repeatedly, that we're one of few countries to have our own domestic manufacturing support in this sense via CSL and the manufacture in Melbourne of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which the government tells us will be up around in the hundreds of thousands per week, if not now, very soon.
I've been very critical of the vaccine rollout, but one thing I will praise the government for, without question, is their choice to manufacture the vaccine locally. I think that was, frankly, very prescient and very good judgment, given the issues we're seeing in the EU. Right, so the EU has blocked exports of the vaccines, and if we didn't have local manufacturing, we'd be in even bigger trouble than what we are in. So I think that was a great decision. Having said that, if you look at the projections of domestic vaccine manufacturing, if we only relied on domestic vaccines, we'd be into mid-2022, a year from now, until we completed our rollout. So it's very clear that we can't just rely on domestically produced vaccines. We need to rely on imports. The other thing I would say is there's been a lot of evidence, varying evidence, but the general trend seems to be that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, which we have to import, tend to have higher efficacy than the AstraZeneca vaccine that we're producing locally. The AstraZeneca vaccine is safe, but it's just less effective than the Pfizer and Moderna. So the more of those Pfizer and Moderna doses we can import, the quicker our rollout will complete and the more protection our society will have when we eventually reopen the border.
And finally, before I let you go, and I very much appreciate your time this Easter Monday, but we've seen some interventions from the head of Sydney Airport, for example, saying we could be left behind, that we could be left behind basically when it comes to vaccines, countries that are inoculated can essentially start travelling, and our infrastructure, transport, airport and otherwise could be left behind. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. So I ordinarily live in Washington, D.C. I'm a professor in Washington. And so I have a lot of friends in the US. And what I'm seeing on Twitter and in messages is a huge number of very young, very healthy friends of mine are starting to be vaccinated, right? So America is into a sort of half of their population having been vaccinated from the virus. And that is leading to a very strange situation. For a year, Australia has led the world on our performance, and very soon it's going to flip. America, the UK, EU are all going to start to get protection from the virus, and they're going to be able to open up, and we aren't, right? Because we have not been ahead of the curve in protecting our population from the virus. Again, we cannot reopen unless we have a very large number of Australians vaccinated, and the costs of delay are enormous. So that the government needs to double down, triple down, quadruple down on its current rate of vaccinations, and frankly do whatever it takes at any price to roll out as quickly as possible.
Steven Hamilton, Chief Economist at the Blueprint Institute. I appreciate your time as always. Talk to you soon.
Cheers, Kieran.